Hi, my name is Lisbeth White. I'm the author of American Sycamore from Perugia Press. I'm very excited to talk to you about origin stories of one of my favorite poems in this collection, American Sycamore, entitled Awakening of Stones Results. I love telling a good origin story about a poem. It's like getting to the underside of an iceberg. And this particular poem I'm going to be sharing with you at the end especially feels like that, partially because it's the last poem in a series of poems. So if you read American Sycamore, if you've read American Sycamore, you will know that I am a fan of the serial poem. I love poems in series. I love this possibility of poems building upon each other and speaking to each other across collection. And Awakening of Stones Results, again, is the last poem in a series of the Awakening Stones poems. So there were two kind of major influences to the Awakening of Stones series as a whole that I want to speak to. The first was reading Diane Seuss, who is an inspiration no matter what. And I was reading one of her collections and came across a poem that she had written, or it might have been actually classified as a creative nonfiction piece, entitled Eden, an outline. And she had written in the form of an outline, this very lyrical, digging inquiry piece that kind of spoke to me as a poet who is into like the meta-poetics of something, right? Like I'm as interested in how a poem comes to be as I am in the poem itself. So I loved this device of an outline as outlining a line of inquiry, right? Or a question or a research proposal. So I became very fascinated with that. And the Awakening of Stones series actually does follow along the form of a research paper. So it begins, the first poem is an outline, Awakening of Stones, an outline, and then we move to Awakening of Stones, a hypothesis. We move through the central argument, we move through the abstract, we move through the methodology before we arrive at Awakening of Stones results. So formally, that was the inspiration for this poem and this series of poems. The other thing that happened at the time was, and this was 2016, so there was a lot of news going on, but I became kind of hooked into one particular news story that was circulating. And this story was about a young Black man, a Black teenager, I think he was 16, 15, 16, in Alabama, who was going through a court case for a nonviolent crime and received an incredibly severe sentence and punishment for it, the kind that you would get for a violent crime. And unfortunately, this type of story around Black Americans in the criminal justice system is not unfamiliar. It's infuriating, it's heartbreaking, it's, enraging. What caught my attention was the way that this story was being reported on. So there was an incident that happened in the courtroom where this young man laughed out loud as the sentence was coming down. And the media had a field day with it, right? And I was really interested in all the different ways that these different media and news outlets were tracking this story. So for instance, one outlet, of course, felt it was a sign of mental health issues or mental illness that was going on for this young man. Another outlet, several outlets thought that he was being very disrespectful of the criminal justice system and being very glib and maybe even sociopathic. And then there were a few media outlets that were actually connecting his laughter as kind of an emotional defense, or reporting it with a way of empathy, creating this interpretation that, of course, he laughed. He doesn't believe in criminal justice. He doesn't believe in justice for him. He knew that this sentence was going to be very harsh. He knew that his life didn't matter in this case. And I ruminated on that for a really long time before I started this series of poems. The question that kept coming back to me was, I felt a sense of empathy also in terms of walking around as a woman of color, as a Black woman, not expecting a lot of safety when I move out into the world. And so I was connecting with what I was interpreting this young man's reaction was with that incident with that poem. And I began to wonder about the antithesis of that, right? Like, what would it be like to walk out your door into the world each day knowing that you are beloved, feeling very assured that your life was respected and honored and cared for? And that became the whole research premise, the treatise of the Awakening of Stone series, was this digging into what if we all felt beloved and cared for and honored when we walked out the door. So by the time we get to Awakening of Stones results, I've moved through some different phases of this kind of line of inquiry. And what I hope I'm doing by the time I get to Awakening of Stones results, the end poem, is demonstrating or sharing an experience that I had while I was traveling. This poem was written during and at the end of a long cross-country road trip where I was intercyclically feeling very safe, right, and very loved and cared for. And it changed the way that I moved across the country. And I think gets to my sense that if we were able to consider ourselves and feel ourselves beloved and connected and honored as we moved through the world, that we would also offer a lot of respect and honoring and connection to the world as we moved through it. So this is Awakening of Stones results. At mile 2,219, the Southwest Desert is stretching long and ashy brown as my thigh. From this distance, the ocean 452 miles away from this dust floor, the ocean 166 million years gone, still salting the back of my throat. The way west is a ceremony of names. Morbid, one may think, or naive. On her grave, I murmur, Great-Grandma Marie, a secret up from the Florida coast. In Mobile, there's Cujo Lewis, Oluwale, Oluwale, I whisper. Through Arkansas, through Oklahoma, grasses wafting waist-high in litany, Quapaw, Tonkawa, Yiskani. Soon I will say bear's ears. Soon I will say yellow-faced bee. Soon I will say Monotropa uniflora, the ghost plant, whose medicine puts us beside our pain, that we may utter a name for its shape and call it something other than ourselves. These are pathways one must be laid bare upon, one must be flayed open to hear. I scrabble up a granite creststone to listen in clear air, burst the plump promise in my fingertips and call the blood sweetness. But it must be known, I am no woman of nostalgia. Never was I speaking the dead, but naming those who lived. Why bother calling memory what is altogether sovereign from the mind and comes winging out from the ribs like a swift? What leaves must be sung to as it goes. We must let unfurl the root of our bodies, span down, across, up, the crossroads, as they say, and feel the ground beneath.